Hello and welcome to our video on Victorian properties looking at the internal areas. The aim of this video is to give you information on Victorian properties and also to advise you on features of the Victorian era of property that can indicate potential problems which can devalue the property and/or cost a lot of money to put right. We are more than happy to talk through any things that you have seen once you have viewed the property, as we want to help you to get the right property at the right price. The areas we will cover are types of floors and the problems, including suspended timber floors and concrete floors, doors, openings and windows within the property, the removing of walls and the effect this can have, and the removing of chimneys, particularly partial removing of chimneys, and how this can cause issues. Let's start on the floor section. Lots of properties of this age have a suspended timber floor and often concrete too. The main floor, the larger floor area, being a suspended timber floor. This is literally a timber floor suspended above the earth. These do tend to have the advantage that they are warmer, however, as they are constructed of timber, they are susceptible to wet rot, dry rot and wood boring insects. One of the bigger problems that occurs with these types of floors is where they are on a sloping site and water is getting underneath the property and damaging the floor structure. Where there are gardens to the front of the property, this doesn't tend to happen unless there is a high water table level or some form of a ground stream, the course of which has been altered by a nearby development or extension or something similar. Generally, in years gone by, we wouldn't have built in these areas. We look more to things where people have altered the property. One of the relatively common things is where the front garden has been changed to be a parking space. We are probably coming across more cases where the whole garden has been changed into a parking area. This then can be tarmacked or brick paved or similar. The ground levels are not normally reduced. The finishes are placed on top of the ground level. Also, often sufficient drainage isn't provided for water landing on this area. We're finding a surprising number of cases that the driveways and parking areas have been carried out without any thought as to the damage they can cause, and fairly often this leads to water discharging towards the building, which can, in the worst case scenario, then leave the air vents that are meant to allow a clear flow of air under the building to act as gutters. Even where this isn't the case, the bricks can absorb the dampness and this can get into and under the timber floor, leading in worst case scenarios to wet rot, dry rot or woodworm. We have in the past, and we recall it well, lifted a carpet. We were going to open up the floor, but when we started to do this, we realised that the timber was full of woodworm and the dust, which is known as frass, which is from the wood-destroying insect eating the timber, with the flight holes being very obvious. The problem was mainly around the external walls, and it would have meant partial replacement of the timber rather than the adding of a French drain or a running gully. We prefer the French drains, as these tend to work better in our experience to take the water away. Now let's talk about the doors, openings and windows within the property. You probably are aware that in Victorian times windows were large as lighting was poor. Doors and door frames can show you that there is movement in the property, as can openings where one room has been made into two. This can be in the form of hairline cracking. However, often this has been decorated over, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, so you do literally have to put a lintel on them to see if they are out of true. By this we mean not vertical and not horizontal. You can also use a digital equivalent, a laser light, but sometimes it's so obvious. We can also sometimes see it in the windows when they don't open and shut properly. Also, if the glass is misty, sometimes this could be poor quality windows, sometimes it could be poor workmanship. Equally, it can indicate movement in the property has broken the seals in the windows. The skill your chartered building surveyor should have is understanding the building and understanding how this 3D puzzle of a building works or doesn't work. Whilst we're on the subject, we should also advise you about older style doors which have glass in them. This does allow light from one room to another, but also, if it is not safety glass and it breaks, and we have stood next to one of these when it has blown shut, you get dagger-like glass. Our surveyor was literally in a house standing next to one of these doors, and the vendor opened the front door to allow the purchaser, our client, in. We always ask them to come along to the surveys. With both the front and the back door open, the wind caught the back door and slammed it shut, resulting in glass shattering next to our surveyor, which was quite a surprise. Our surveyors normally take pictures of the frame if they think it's out of alignment. So a decision has to be made on the doors as to what you are going to do, as to whether you replace them or whether you just have to be very careful. It is an unusual thing to happen, as these doors have survived quite a while. The original doors are likely to have been timber panel doors, so these doors have often been replaced in the 60s and 70s as the fashion of doors changed. Next, we talk about the removal of walls and the effect this can have. In some older properties, particularly Victorian houses, structural issues can arise when internal walls are removed to create a more open plan layout. In years gone by, this was done without installing sufficient structural support, leading to deflection or sagging at first floor level. We've encountered several cases where they have thickened up the timbers, sometimes resembling railway track. It's often said that old railway lines were recycled in this way. We understand that following the Beeching's report to the government in 1963, led by Dr. Richard Beeching, then chairman of the British Railways Board, there was a closure of approximately 4,500 route miles and 2,500 stations, with over 50,000 job losses. We also understand there was a lot of rail closures between 1923 and 1939. The argument, as presented by Winston Churchill, the president of the Board of Trade at the time, was that without future rationalisation and amalgamation, the railways didn't have a good future. So we don't know whether it's an urban myth or not, but we can see how this resulted in the use of the railway track, and from what we have been told over the years, these were then used as supporting lintels over windows, doors and openings. It was a great form of recycling, however, it was not the best thing to do, as in some circumstances it has resulted in deflecting floors and in worst case scenarios has caused movement in the buildings. Let's move on to chimneys. Partial removal of chimneys can be a problem, particularly where the bottom of the chimney is removed, often to gain extra space in rooms, or where there has been a reconfiguration, for example to add an indoor bathroom, which can result in the chimney still being visible at roof level, but then the weight of it puts additional stresses and strains on your building, particularly if your neighbours have removed their chimneys as well. The chimney is effectively sitting at roof level unsupported. Over the years, there has been different ways of supporting that the more diligent builders carried out, from breaking back the brickwork, which is where it steps back diagonally, to adding in gallows brackets to support the chimney, which look like a structure of hanging someone, hence the name of gallows brackets. In more recent times, building regulations has led to the adding of lintels to support the chimney independently, which is a much better way, particularly if next door decides to remove their chimney as well. All of this should be covered by the Party Wall Act. Sometimes it isn't particularly just the ground, but the work that's been done on top of it. Where you have builders who don't know what they are doing, which is what we would call extreme DIY, and have made changes without understanding the consequences. Rather than do it yourself, we would call it destroy it yourself. These problems can be even worse when the property is in clay soil area, for example, and you are getting subsidence or heave. Subsidence is where the clay shrinks, and heave is where the clay pushes up. Regarding internal changes and alterations, often people add and change the original building. Remember, many of the original Victorian buildings wouldn't have had a bathroom. These have been added over the years. This can create more humidity, particularly if there is a fair number of people in the house. You do need to make sure there is good extraction, otherwise during certain times of the year, humidity will be created. This then in turn can lead to condensation and black mould. Condensation often occurs during the wetter times of the year or more humid times of the year, and this is also a time when it's difficult to get washing dried, and it then tends to be dried inside, adding to the humidity. Often, even the opening of windows won't get rid of the humidity as it's more humid outside. You need an extractor to draw the humid air out, literally throw it outside. This is why we are keen on humidity-controlled extract fans, as they simply switch on and off until the humidity is reduced. These can be working away whilst you are out. We have experience where this can take a considerable amount of time, so if you can help and assist it by cleaning down excessive moisture on shower panels and shower doors, this will help. We hope you found this video helpful. If you are interested in Victorian property, please free phone 0800 298 5424 or email help@firstassociated.co.uk. Thank you.